Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade, and welcome to Fox News Tonight. It is Friday the 13th, so we're making sure we're looking out for you extra hard tonight. Got a big show on tap, including new developments in the Harvey Weinstein scandal. Man, this is getting bigger. Could this be the end of Hollywood as we know it? Could they be becoming part of everyday society? And authorities in Las Vegas changed the timeline for the mass shooting yet again. We'll tell you what that's all about. I'm a little befuddled still. But first, our top story, President Trump refusing to certify the Iranian deal because they're not complying to the terms, as the president said. Here's what he said, actually, in his prolific speech at about 12:45 this afternoon. Listen.
I am announcing today that we cannot and will not make this certification. We will not continue down a path whose predictable conclusion is more violence, more terror, and the very real threat of Iran's nuclear breakout.
But it's a little bit more complicated than that. The ball is now in Congress's court, which must decide whether or not to slap additional sanctions on Iran and go back to the beginning. President Trump said if he doesn't get what he needs from Congress, he'll completely cancel the nuke deal. Listen.
Well, I think we're going to take a look, John, at what happens. We're going to see what happens. We're going to see what they come back with. They may come back with something that's very satisfactory to me. And if they don't, within a very short period of time, I'll terminate the deal.
The only people that talk longer in front of helicopters was the cast of MASH. For more on this momentous story, let's bring in Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry from Washington. Ed, things aren't as they appear. Just because it's decertified doesn't mean it's canceled, right?
Correct. What the president is doing is finding a middle ground. So we've got to cut through the noise. His critics in the mainstream media and elsewhere, Democrats on Capitol Hill, are saying, look, this is outrageous. This is extreme. The president is ripping up this nuclear deal. No, he's actually trying, at least, to chart a middle course, saying, I don't want to certify this deal again, but I'm not going to scrap it altogether. Instead, he's doing kind of what he did on DACA with the immigration deal, saying, look, Congress, if you like this deal so much, codify it. Spell out for me exactly how we are going to make certain demands of Iran to say if you don't meet these demands, then you're going to be hit with very powerful sanctions that will hit their economy hard. Because right now there are expiration dates, if you will, in the Iran nuclear deal signed by then President Barack Obama, where Iran can basically play hide the ball, if you will, for a while, wait it out for a few years, and then all of a sudden key parts of the deal expire and they could have nuclear weapons and be in what, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has called a breakout period and a point of no return where we can't stop them. Look, by the way, at what Michael Oren is saying on Twitter in the last couple of days. He's the former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., and you see it right there. He says intel sources say that in 2016 alone, Iran tried importing military nuclear components 32 times last year. 32 times, so much for adhering to the nuclear deal. Why is that important? We hear repeatedly the president is wrong on this because Iran, among other things, is adhering to the deal. So why rip it up? In fact, Brian, key people who are very familiar with this deal, a former ambassador like Michael Oren, saying Iran has been trying to cheat on this deal repeatedly.
I talked to Senator Joe Lieberman yesterday. He's involved with a group called Anti-Iranian Group. So wants to keep them from getting nukes, and he says they got reports on that as well, but they have not hit mainstream and not been digested by the legislative branch. A couple of things that are encouraging. General Mattis also said, we're better off sticking with the deal, even though I didn't like the deal. What is he saying now?
That's an interesting question. I'm glad you asked, Brian, because General Mattis testified on Capitol Hill several days ago that he wanted to keep this Iran nuclear deal hatched by the Obama administration. That was a split from President Trump. So all eyes now on Secretary Mattis. And today he made it clear, well, he's on board with this middle ground that the president is charting, at least for now. And then he said this.
I give advice to the president. He was elected by the American people, and I stand by this Iran strategies that came out today. If they want to act like a decent nation that looks out for its own people's interests and works as part of the international community, no problem. But if they do criminal acts, they violate international law, they're held to account, obviously.
So he's suggesting, Secretary Mattis, that he's on board, at least for now. He's also saying tonight that the U.S. military is watching very closely for any provocations by Iran all around the world in reaction to President Trump. And here's another important point. You've got the U.K., the Germans, the French are out tonight saying that they're against President Trump's approach here, that they want to see the Iran nuclear deal stay with no new negotiations at all. Look, that feeds into the criticism of this president going it alone. But on the other hand, it also feeds into his approach on the positive side, which is that he's going to put America first and not do what the French and the Germans want to do. He's going to do what he thinks is in America's interest.
Couple of things, Ed. It's so rare for a president to give Congress additional power. That's the way it was originally set up. For our lifetimes, for the most part, presidents trying to get power and keep it. He's saying, Congress, I respect you. Work on DACA. Hey, do me a favor. Work on this. Make it better. I'll take a look at it and decide what I want to do. In fact, obviously, Senator Tom Cotton and Senator Corker, who I'm sure they're not on speaking terms with the president right now, they already said they're going to start working on the flaws in this agreement. Tom Cotton was a big critic of it. So they're ready to go in the Senate.
Yeah, and Brian, your point is important because as well, when the president was undoing these subsidy payments to health insurance companies today on Obamacare, separate but related, he was also pointing out Congress never passed a law saying we're going to pay out these billions of dollars to the insurance companies. So it may not be lawful. It hasn't been codified. And Speaker Paul Ryan is backing the president on that tonight, saying Congress has the power of the purse, not the Trump administration or the Obama administration. Right. So you're right. There are people on Capitol Hill who may not like the outlines of this, but bottom line is the president is saying, Congress, if you've got better ideas, you should join, you should share the blame and or the credit here.
And lastly, we know, just to arm everybody if they want to go out and look at this deal, and if this comes up at the water cooler or at the bar tonight, Senator Cardin, Senator Schumer, Senator Menendez, Senator Manchin, just 4 Democrats off the top of my head that voted against this deal. Don't let them sit there and say how much they like it now, because it's got the same flaws when they voted it down.
Brian, that might be the most important point, because any changes to this deal will need 60 votes in the Senate. So Republican votes alone will not work.
Yep.
So Democrats who oppose this deal are going to have to take a stand here, because for the president to reach 60 votes for any changes, it's going to have to be bipartisan.
He is Ed Henry. Ed, thanks so much. You can start your Friday.
Thanks, buddy. Have a good weekend.
All right. Meanwhile, America's top European allies, who are also part of the Iranian nuke deal, of course, say they're still committed to the original agreement.
It is not a bilateral agreement. It does not belong to any single country, and it is not up to any single country to terminate it.
We will work very hard to persuade our friends and partners in the US Congress that we think the deal has value, and there are many people in Congress who want to fix it, not nix it.
Right. And a lot of people want to get him a comb or a brush. That is Boris Johnson. Meanwhile, to further analyze the situation, let's bring in Ambassador John Bolton, former ambassador to the United Nations, and a big critic of this deal. I'm wondering, Ambassador, are you happy with what the president decided to do tonight?
Well, I think by announcing again how bad he thinks the deal is, he signaled pretty clearly that he expects he's going to get out of it in due course. My preference, and I've said this all along, is that we just ought to abrogate the deal and get out of it. He's adopted a two-stage approach, but I think there's a very important line in the speech that says that he reserves the power to get out of the deal at any moment. It's under continuous review. So he is making it clear that ultimately the decision is his. And I think we're headed in the right direction. I would have been happier resolving it today because I think clarity is important, but we're on the right path, I believe.
Ambassador, did you have a chance to talk to the president about this? Because I know he really respects your opinion.
I did yesterday, and I appreciate that opportunity, absolutely.
And
we had a great talk about it. That's all I'm going to say.
Really? Because I'll just sit here in silence until you talk. I'll wait you out. I got time. I'm telling you.
You watch. He's look, I think he has demonstrated, beginning in the campaign and through his tenure to date, he understands the threat of nuclear proliferation from the likes of Iran and North Korea, and he's determined to prevent it on his watch. He's been left with some very unhappy options in both cases, and as I say, the beginning the process of ending this deal is a major step, a huge departure from Obama, and you know, it doesn't look like the Hillary Clinton presidency either.
By the way, the one who's the biggest critic of this announcement and the speech today, even though we're not totally out of it yet, is John Kerry, who cut the deal. He says it's very, very poor non-strategic diplomacy. He said his voice was rising when he was speaking. He says you cannot unilaterally reset the terms of this deal. The minute we see the stockpile going up, the questions and red flags will go up like crazy. 15 or 25 years from now, you will still have the military options that you have today. So what's the rush is what he's saying. What's the rush, Ambassador?
You know, this deal doesn't mean a thing to the Iranians, and the very fact that we've gone through this negotiation shows they can't be trusted. People seem to have forgotten, starting with John Kerry, not to mention the Europeans, that Iran is a party to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, where they solemnly pledged never to seek or acquire nuclear weapons. They've been violating the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is the European Union foreign policy spokeswoman, Madame Margherini, just said a moment ago, is a multilateral obligation. What do you need this deal for at all? If you believe that they'll adhere to their obligations, the fact is they won't. But even beyond that, to allow them, on the basis of their record, to have any uranium enrichment capability at all shows why this deal is inherently unworkable. Right. And it was a surrender by the Europeans and a surrender by Kerry and Obama.
Ambassador, for 3 years, the President Obama tried not to upset the apple cart in the Middle East as Iran just ran through Iraq, ran over Syria, destroyed the uprising, reinvigorated with Hezbollah in order to keep this deal on track. A deal that we originally said, you got to renounce terrorism. They said no. We said, all right, we'll keep talking. Then we said, no more enrichment of uranium. They said, no, we're still going to do that. We kept talking. And that's why we're ending up with this deal, which not even 50 senators voted for. I laugh at the fact that people are actually acting like this is a good deal and this crazy billionaire from New York wants to get out of it. That's just not the facts.
Yeah, let's come back to the Europeans here, because everybody is wringing their hands that the Europeans will be upset with us. I remember very clearly during the Bush administration in 2003, these same European countries, Britain, France, and Germany, said, we want to negotiate with Iran. Our aim is to stop all uranium enrichment. In fact, they said, we won't even agree to negotiate with them unless they suspend all enrichment activity during the negotiations. Right. And they systematically gave that position up. I didn't think it was a good idea to negotiate with Iran on this in 2003 because I didn't trust them then. We have been taken to the cleaners. What the president did today is the first step in reversing that, and it's an important step. Not as far as we could have gone, but we're on the way. And if they're unhappy with it, well, they can decide whether they want to trade with Iran or whether they want to trade with us.
Yeah, do yourself a favor. Get yourself some military. Put your money where your mouth is, and then people might pay attention. Listen, this president said, I want out of the Paris Agreement. He got out. The TPP, he got out. Afghanistan, he wanted to get out originally. He listened and decided to stay and change the rules of engagement. And here, he wanted to originally get out, saw how front-loaded it was, and took a different path. I don't know why some people have such a hard time giving him credit. He's listening and deciding and moving in a rational, deliberate fashion. I find it very intriguing. And since it's not black and white in a soap opera, people have trouble following it. Ambassador, thanks so much. One day you'll tell me what the president said. I guess not. All right, thanks, Ambassador. Have a great Friday. Up next, the Harvey Weinstein scandal and the possible collapse of Hollywood. New details right after this. Welcome back, everybody. In addition to producing Oscar-winning films, he's gotten 75 Oscars. Disgraced movie mogul Harvey Weinstein has been a longtime big shot in the Democratic Party, donating large sums to campaigns, including this woman named Hillary Clinton. Weinstein's sexual assault allegations have put Mrs. Clinton on the defensive, so to speak, and she wasn't exactly taking the high road today. Watch Hillary pivot from Weinstein to President Trump.
I think it's important that we not just focus on him and whatever consequences flow from the stories about his behavior, but that we recognize this kind of behavior cannot be tolerated anywhere, whether it's in entertainment, politics. Well, you know, after all, we have someone admitting to being a sexual assaulter in the Oval Office.
Didn't admit to being a sexual assaulter in the Oval Office. That's unbelievable. Joining us right now for a reaction from Houston is former prosecutor Nicole DeBoard. Thanks for joining us, Nicole. And here in studio,
thanks for having me.
Carly Shimkus, Fox News Headlines reporter, 24/7. You saw on this very set at 4 a.m. this morning on Fox News, on
Happy to
Fox
be
and
back.
Friends
Absolutely.
First. Absolutely. Nicole, let me start with you. First off, were you shocked by that tact from Hillary?
It was a fairly strong shift away from what the actual subject that was being discussed was. So it was a little surprising. Yes, I was surprised.
$43,000 she got from Harvey Weinstein, let alone the bundling and the other parties he's thrown. She's like, I'm not going to give it all back.
Yeah.
And she wanted to switch this again. By the way, to show you how close these two couples are, Uma Abedin's advising Harvey Weinstein during the divorce proceedings.
Harvey Weinstein's wife?
Yeah, and
Yikes.
Uma Abedin with, she's the best, the
Holy
chief
cow.
assistant.
Well, Hillary Clinton says that she's a champion of women. And if you look at her Twitter account, her pinned tweet, meaning the first tweet that you see, is something that she wrote after she lost the election. And it says, to all the little girls watching, never doubt that you are valuable and powerful and deserving of every chance and opportunity in the world. Well, then you got to ask yourself, why stay silent for 5 days if you truly believe that all these little girls out there are valuable and powerful?
I think that's
height of hypocrisy.
I would think so. And I think also I want you to bring out somebody else who's very well known, Jane Fonda. She weighed in on this and has a few regrets.
I found out about Harvey about a year ago, and I'm ashamed that I didn't say anything right then.
Why didn't you? You're so bold.
I was not that bold because I guess it hadn't happened to me, and so I didn't feel it was my place.
I am not going to put myself in a woman's place in this situation, but I see Angelina Jolie and Gwyneth Paltrow and Jane Fonda. What is it like? What am I missing, Nicole? Why wouldn't they come forward once they establish themselves as box office bankable?
You know, I think there's probably a fair amount of thinking that it's not my business. But the reality is that thank goodness that the women who finally were bold enough to came out with this information. I think it's going to be a giant foundational shift for the way Hollywood does its business. And I think that we're seeing the just waterfall of ramifications when someone had the courage to come forward. And it was finally the right thing to do.
Right. And you know what? To echo that, I think this is not only a defining moment in Hollywood history, but also American history, because we're talking about abuse that runs so deeply that Harvey Weinstein wasn't only able to walk around in public, but he was celebrated. He was one of the most thanked people in Oscars history, and by all accounts, a predator, and everybody knew he was a predator. So I hope this does promote change, much needed change. But I remember thinking that after everything went down with the Bill Cosby scandal, and look where we are today.
Right, and that we kind of skidded into that. Harvey Weinstein's been pushing these stories down for years, 13 years before the New York Times wrote it, and the next day the New Yorker wrote it, and the NBC tried to squash it, and they have a lot to answer to there. And this is why I think you're right on the money, Carly, because in researching for this, I was led to a George Clooney story where a woman that was on the set of ER, this woman says that he destroyed, Vanessa Marquez says, George Clooney destroyed my career and blackballed me right out of the business after he rejected her, she rejected his advances. Ben Affleck, at least 3 accusers have come forward. He's apologized to at least one of them. Oliver Stone, the same thing. I think we're going to be here next week, different outfits, maybe a different time slot, talking about a growing list of women and men stepping up saying this isn't right and I'm finally ready to speak up. What do you think?
I think that's exactly right. This is business as usual since Hollywood began. And I think that we're going to be hearing from a lot more women over the next few days.
And do you think things change, though, Carly? Because no business and no company is perfect.
Yeah.
But it seems like Hollywood was just playing by their own rules.
Well, you know what? You can hope that things will change. But I think this is what happens when high-profile people get left unchecked for so long. Who was going to question them? The media? Right. NBC had this story a while ago, and that didn't happen. A lot of other people in the Hollywood community knew that this was going on and didn't say anything. Right. So maybe it will change the fact that people will feel more able to speak out in the future.
And, Nicole, this is my theory, having lived out in Los Angeles for 5 years and doing news and stand-up, not into acting, but most of my friends would be into acting. You go from nowhere, $22,000 a year. You get that movie, it's like hitting lotto. And every day you have that hope that today is going to be your day, that you hit lotto. And then what would you do to do that? Well, I'll prepare, I'll get ready, I'll show up, and I'll train. But what else would you do? And that's what you're asked on a daily basis. Am I right? That's what's unique about this business.
You know, I think that's right. And the problem is it's not just what would you do to get that ticket. It's what would you do to have another day to have that opportunity to still be in the game. And unfortunately, some of these very talented young women were put in a position of making a choice that really wasn't a choice at all. Either do what these men who had all the control over all the roles wanted them to do, or be out. And that's not a real choice.
And it's such a hard thing to take a 25-year-old woman who has a dream and think, what do I have to do to get that, and is it worth it in the long run?
And if you look at the history, he preyed on these women at the beginning of their career when they were the most vulnerable and felt the least powerful. And
Carly will go on Twitter a little bit later and talk about the 5 shows she did and how this was her favorite to close out the night. Nicole, I hope you back her up on that.
Was.
All right, Nicole and Carly, thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
All right, when we come back, another timeline shift in the Las Vegas shooting. I watched this presser. I was stunned. A full report when we return. All right, authorities in Las Vegas have changed the timeline once again for the October 1st rampage. 58 dead, we know that. Over 500 wounded, 40 plus are still in the hospital. Now, the Clark County Sheriff's Department now saying a security guard was shot by the gunman in Mandalay Bay Hotel just as the massacre was beginning, rather than 6 minutes before at 10:59 when Stephen Paddock really got underway. He began firing indiscriminately at the Country Music Festival right after 10 o'clock. So the Sheriff's Department says it's not hiding anything from the public, just getting it clear.
There is no conspiracy between the FBI, between LVMPD, and the MGM. Nobody is attempting to hide anything. Reference this investigation. The dynamics and the size of this investigation requires us to go through voluminous amounts of information in order to draw an accurate picture. My intent, like I stated earlier, is to give you information as I know it, unverified, to calm the public, not to establish a legal case.
My sense is the sheriff feels as though his integrity is being challenged. He also got very emotional when discussing the heroism on display that fateful night.
Samuel Whitwer. Excuse me for my emotion. Samuel was laying on his couch with a very intensive wound to his leg. During the melee and his attempt to evacuate victims, he sustained a broken leg. But he remained on scene and provided security for the medical personnel. So at this point, I want to thank the community. I want to thank you for letting me be your sheriff and Vegas strong. Thanks.
Didn't take questions. Joining us now for their reaction, they've been with us through this entire atrocity, is counterterrorism expert Aaron Cohen, and in Washington, Jim Hansen, president of the Security Studies Group. Back to the timeline, and I want your analysis on this. It turns out 9:59, and the security guard went there, Aaron, but he did not get shot at 9:59 like we thought. Instead, he saw the barricade there. He couldn't get any further, so he went to the above floor. By the time he got himself down to the door again, it was 10:05. Then he got shot. The gunman starts at 10:20. What do you think has taken so long to get to this timeline, and do you think we'll get another revision?
I think that this is a guy. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of rounds being fired on a hotel that's how many floors?
30. Well, I don't know how many, but it's the 32nd floor.
Yeah, Brian, I've been training SWAT teams for 15 years. Let me tell your audience, the clearing a hotel of this scale, and Las Vegas Metro SWAT team is a full-time SWAT team comprised of dozens of full-time entry SWAT members. And even with the full team deployed into the hotel, to be able to clear every one of those halls to determine where the shots are coming from, regardless of whether you're getting assistance from an on-site security guard who may or or have may not been shot, it's all irrelevant to me. The size of this tactical clearing is so colossal that the fact that the SWAT team managed to get to that door, regardless of when the security guard was hit, and then be able to make entry on that room, regardless of how they got in using a breach, whether the shooting stopped or hadn't stopped, the fact that they got to that door, the fact that they were able to make entry on that room is in itself. These guys are chemical dumping. They're in tunnel vision. Their neck hairs are standing on them. These guys have families too. It's colossal. This guy's just figuring out all the pieces to put everything together here so that he can figure out what the heck happened.
Right. Jim, I'm not going to, so many law enforcement watch us and watching you right now. I'll never be critical of them. I've never done it. But it's 12 days later, and they've made a bunch of revisions since. Now, he was upset because he thinks people are questioning his integrity. They're not. They're just trying to get it down. The fact that at 10:05 he gets shot, but at 9:59 he encounters the gunman, what does that tell you?
Again, I think when he got shot versus when he encountered the gunman, and the fact that they messed up the timeline on that is probably more of a fact that that sheriff has had, I don't know, what, a couple hours sleep every night since this happened, has been racking his brain for, is there anything we could have done to respond faster? You know, they've had to look at all that stuff and say, okay, the calls came in at this time, we responded at this time. Was that as fast as it could have been done? Was there anything we could have done to get there quicker that might have saved a life? And I think in the end, this was an honest mistake that was made just in the timeline rather than something sketchy about what actually happened.
So, Aaron, disabuse me of this. He brings gloves to survive, and they said protective clothing in order to get out. He's trying to shoot at the tanks. That rumor that we went over that one day turns out to be true. He thought maybe he could explode them, I imagine. Did something with the car. We haven't figured that out yet. But then he ends up killing himself in 9 minutes. Why would he kill himself in 9 minutes? And are you sure of that? Do you think that he could have misfired, like killed himself by mistake? I think we've all seen those. We might have all seen those pictures online of what he looks like.
I don't think he killed him. Excuse me, Brian. I don't think he killed himself by mistake. And that's why I don't believe that there's any link to ISIS. I don't believe he's a terrorist. He wasn't trying to blow himself up. He wasn't. A terrorist goal would be to continue shooting and firing and firing. The fact that this guy ended up getting killed before the SWAT team made entry, per the report, leads me to believe that he was mentally off. There was something very disturbing about this guy, or disturbed mentally and psychologically. Him killing himself means that he was trying to get as much damage done, and the protective clothing meant that either his hands were going to get hot from barrels and from receivers and from handles and from as much fire putting down as possible. I just think that was tactical considerations that he made to be able to fire all of those weapons in the shortest period of time to do as much damage as possible.
So Jim, you can answer that, and I want to add this to it and see if you want to jump in on it. Turns out he was there 2 days earlier. The reason why they were confused is because his wife rang in 2 days later to get her name on the room. Why that was necessary, I'm not sure. Was it to get a key? Who knows? And that's why people said, well, he was actually needed 2 extra days to get that arsenal up there. Does any of that mean anything to you?
You know, Brian, the sad thing is there are no facts that are known exclusively that are inconsistent with this being one guy who is obsessed with killing a ton of people, bought the guns himself, did most of the work himself, and ended up dead in that hotel room. You know, the problem is, and this is the sad thing, we all want some sort of closure for the victims. We want an enemy to hang this on. We want something. Instead, there's a void, and that void fills up with conspiracy theories. And unfortunately, we may have to live with the fact that this horrific shooting that killed all these people didn't have anything more than one sad, sick individual at the heart of it.
But if that woman, his girlfriend, who ended up in the Philippines, came up to that room, she had to see 23 bags of weapons. And for her, if she did in fact see that, unless this guy's just a master hide-and-seeker, if she did in fact see that and didn't report it, she's in a lot of trouble, and she's got a lot more to say than it's a big surprise. I thought he was breaking up with me. Jim and Aaron, thanks so much.
Thanks, Good to be here, Brian.
All right, coming up straight ahead, did President Trump just kill Obamacare with a stroke of a pen over the last 2 days? Analysis next. All right, President Trump taking matters into his own hands on Obamacare this week, declaring that the federal government will immediately stop providing a $7 billion subsidy for insurance providers because things weren't adding up for Obamacare when President Obama was in office. Now, the president's move could cause the entire structure, some say, that underlines Obamacare to crumble. And more than a dozen states led by California have already filed a lawsuit seeking to force the Trump administration to continue to make those payments. And just a short time ago, on the Twitter machine, the president was fired up. He said this: money pouring into insurance companies, profits under the guise of Obamacare is over. They have made a fortune. Dems must get smart and deal, unquote. And he said that he would pull back and let Senator Murray and Senator Alexander, if they cut a deal, he'd pull back and listen to what the compromise deal would be. Joining us right now for reaction, we are looking at Washington, Siraj Hashami, the assistant editor of Red Alert Politics, and also Ned Ryan, our Republican strategist. Ned, what the president's doing, is it sabotage? Is that labeling this correct? Sabotage?
No, I mean, look, Brian, the fact of the matter is Obamacare was dying before he became president. Insurers were fleeing the exchanges, and these cost reduction payments were illegal. They were unlawful. They were unconstitutional. What they were, Brian, is they were bribes to the insurance companies to lure them into Obamacare that the American taxpayers were having to pay for. And so what Trump is really doing, and I'm encouraged by this, you mentioned this earlier in the show when dealing with the Iranian deal, when it comes to DACA, when it comes to Iran, when it comes to Obamacare, he's doing the right things legally and constitutionally. We don't want an imperial presidency. And of his own volition, Trump is saying, let's put this power back into the legislative branch where it belongs, not in the executive branch. So he's doing the right things legally and constitutionally.
And Siraj, one thing is being spun negatively. They say, well, that $7 billion is for people that can't afford insurance. And he believes, the president, that the $7 billion was already proved to be unconstitutional, which is correct. The court said President Obama couldn't write that check without going through Congress first, right?
Right, and they actually went through appropriations back in 2013. But remember, this is actually a gravy train for the insurance companies. Poor people weren't actually seeing a dime of this. And there was, there was a CNN Chiron that was showing that, Trump was ending the subsidies to poor people, which is actually factually incorrect because they were actually going to insurance companies. And there was no incentive for them to lower premiums because, they just kept getting taxpayer money. So if you look at how, the insurance companies were responding, after this executive order, there's now finally an incentive for insurance companies to lower premiums, which shifts the equation of Obamacare. It doesn't kill it, but definitely hurts it.
Ned, when you look at what basically is going on here, the president did not want to do this. He wanted this done the right way because President Obama did almost all. He had accomplished so much. Whatever he accomplished, 90% of it was executive orders. And he's watching them be overturned right now. President Trump doesn't want to do that.
Well, you're seeing is because when you do executive orders, they're not into law. You have to go through the legislative process to actually make these things long term. I think Trump should take this one more step, though, Brian, if he really wants to accelerate Congress's work on repealing and replacing Obamacare. In 2013, the Office of Personnel Management passed a rule allowing Congress and its staff to be able to buy insurance through the Small Business Exchange in D.C., essentially letting Congress and the staff use government contributions to pay for 3/4 of their premiums. And the thing that does, it doesn't exempt them from Obamacare, but it exempted them from the realities of Obamacare. Trump can deal with this in an administrative way and really put the pressure on Congress to accelerate. Because we all know Obamacare is not working, it's failing, it's dying, and what he's doing is compressing the timeline on that process. He can do it even faster by doing that with Congress and its staff.
So you have to actually throw more water on the rocks, Siraj, in order to get the lawmakers to do something, make them uncomfortable?
Yeah, what Trump is doing is he's playing the long game. I mean, by alienating a lot of the Republican Party and trying to get a lot of pro-Trump Republicans to run for office. You might be looking at the 2018 midterms as maybe the earliest time in which you could get more Republicans in both the House and Senate to pass something through the legislative branch. And right now, there are many establishment Republicans who are just opposed to repealing it. I mean, Susan Collins, to name one. Rand Paul, who's always been a staunch no because he wants the full repeal and not just a repeal and replace right away.
Ned, one thing is clear. Rand Paul had a lot to do with this. He said this on our show in the morning. He said, I told the president you could do this cross state lines thing. You could do it yourself. They spend a lot of time together now. And believe it or not, even though he stopped the president a couple of times with legislation, I think he's listening to him.
No, I think he is. And again, Trump made a nice move this morning with the executive order, and again, the next one with cutting off these subsidy payments. You know, I think that there's a fair point to be made about the 2018 elections that, you know, I'm hopeful we might be able to see tax reform. I'm hopeful we might be able to see some of these agenda items passed before we get into 2018. But I'm being realistic. There are plenty of Republicans in Congress right now who have intentional inability to pass any part of the Trump agenda. And so I think you might have to have a few primaries to get more of these people into office so they come to D.C. and say, you know what? This is not just even a Trump agenda. It's not a Republican agenda. It's a common sense agenda that benefits the American people. Let's get down to business.
Ned Bannon, Ryan, thanks so much for joining me. And Siraj Hashami, thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
All right, coming up straight ahead, President Trump becoming the first sitting president to address the Value Voter Summit. One of its main organizers joins us with his reaction next.